Hello, welcome to our online panel event, Barriers Beyond Borders, the realities that asylum seekers face from the sea to Athens. Please make sure you have your microphones muted during the event. Just to say that this event is being recorded, so if you don't want to be filmed, please turn off your video. We will be monitoring the chat for any questions and we will be asking them after our panel has finished after our discussion. If you want to send a question privately, please send it to either me or Harry if you're on Zoom, and on Khora Facebook page if you're watching through Facebook Live. We will read them anonymously in that case. I'm Krisa.
I'm Harry.
And we both work with Khora Asylum Support Team. Khora Asylum Support Team is a self-organized, volunteer-run collective of caseworkers, interpreters, and lawyers. And we are non-hierarchical, which means that we don't have a supervisor or a coordinator. We provide legal information and information about different services in Athens, as well as social support. KAST is part of the wider organization Khora, which is a cooperative foundation in Athens providing services to displaced people. We run a social kitchen, a free shop, and a creative space for women and LGBTQI people. Khora does not take any money from the European Union, from the state, or any larger funding organization, so we completely rely financially on grassroots and individual financial support. In the light of today's today's event, is part of our crowdfunding campaign in order to raise essential funds for our interpreter salaries. Our interpreters are an integral part of our team, and we could not function without them, nor could we communicate with the vast majority of our clients. Our goal is to raise 10,000 euros, which is the yearly salaries for all of our 4 interpreters. Any donation is greatly welcome. We will post our fundraising platform link in the comments below, where you can donate and support us.
Thanks, Krisa. Through our work at KAST, we are consistently working to try and alleviate the damage caused by the violence of Europe's immigration policy. So we try to help people with legal advice and information, housing support, medical referrals and accompaniments, and access to basic supplies such as food and clothing. However, we are only ever really fighting against the symptoms of structural racist, nationalist, and capitalist ideologies that enact brutalities against some of the most vulnerable populations. And at KAST, we acknowledge that it's not enough to focus only on providing aid and frontline supports, although that is greatly needed. We also need to be consistently discussing how best to organize against the systemic root causes of the violence that we see both here in Greece and abroad. And in the light of this, our topic tonight is barriers. Displaced people in Europe face an overwhelming number of barriers to safe and long-term accommodation or financial support, barriers to entering Europe and claiming asylum, barriers to maintaining and developing community support systems, barriers to exercising their political and human rights, barriers to being reunited with their families, and so on. And these barriers are sometimes stark geographical or physical structures, but are sometimes less visible and work in much more insidious ways. So we hope tonight to provide some information about these barriers, thoughts on their existence and persistence, and ways in which they can maybe be challenged, weakened, or made no longer viable. So tonight we're joined by 3 great speakers who will each be sharing their thoughts on the barriers they frequently encounter through their work experiences in Greece and abroad. First, Iason Apostolopoulos will be discussing the violence enacted at the borders of Europe in an attempt to prevent displaced people from entering the EU. He'll be speaking about European migration policies at sea, with a specific emphasis on the pushbacks which have been occurring on Lesbos, among other places, and the maritime policing of the Mediterranean Sea between Italy and Libya. Second, Lucy Alper will be speaking about the barriers within the asylum system here in Greece. She'll begin by focusing on the difficulties of the pre-registration and registration stage, and specifically the use of Skype and the appalling delays in the asylum registration process here in Athens. She'll then discuss other struggles faced by registered asylum seekers, specifically regards to housing, and we'll finally discuss the barriers that remain when someone has become a recognized refugee. And finally, Wael Habal will speak about the importance of language and will share his personal experience of learning languages. He will analyse how lack of language skills are barriers for displaced people here in Athens. And we'll finally talk about how language and culture share community based on his experience with the Syrian Greek Youth Forum. Just a quick word on the terminologies that we'll be using today. Our panelists will be using a variety of terms to describe displaced people, as some of our panel will be focusing on the implications of registering for asylum and becoming a refugee. They'll be using more legal terms to describe people who are part of this asylum system, but each panelist will clarify these terms at the outset of their talk.
So as said before, today's panel consists of Iason Apostolopoulos, Lucy Alper, and Wael Habal. Iason Apostolopoulos is from Athens, Greece, and over the past 6 years, he has been involved in maritime search and rescue activities and solidarity projects in response to the so-called refugee crisis at the borders of Europe, mainly in Italy and Greece. Since March 2019, he has been the rescue coordinator of the Italian association Mediterranea Saving Humans on board the Mare Ionio rescue ship in the central Mediterranean Sea.
Lucy Alper has been providing legal support for 10 years. She's from the UK originally, but has been living in Greece for the past 2 years. And Wael Habal is a cultural mediator and community leader, is currently an Arabic interpreter with the Khora Asylum support team. He co-founded the Syrian Greek Youth Forum, is a member of the Solidarity Fields Farmers Association, and is a European leader with the Obama Foundation. So we will now pass the word on to Iason, and as a reminder, you can post any questions you need in the chat, either privately to me or Chrissa, or publicly. Iason, over to you.
Hello to everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation. My name is Iason Apostolopoulos. My pronouns are him, his. And as it was mentioned, since 2019, I have been the rescue coordinator of the Italian association Mediterranea Saving Humans, which is not an NGO. It is an association supported by a network of different anti-racist initiatives. And it was born as a way to fill a void when search and rescue activities were seriously restricted as a result of the policy of closed ports and the criminalization of sea rescue. We have a rescue ship called Mare Ionio, which unfortunately is currently blocked in the port of Venice by the Italian authorities. But when it is not, we are patrolling in the international waters of the Libyan coastline, searching for refugee boats in distress with the objective to rescue the people, transfer them to the nearest, provide them with medical assistance, and transfer them to the nearest place of safety, which in our case is Italy or Malta. Apart from rescue activities, we are trying to address the lack of media coverage, witnesses, and information from the sea borders of Europe. Monitoring and reporting is of crucial importance since nowadays human rights violations have become the norm. And more than 60% of the people on the move are abducted at sea by the so-called Libyan Coast Guard and are returned to torture camps in Libya with the direct assistance of the EU and its member states. A short clarification. During my talk, I will be using the terms migrant and refugees alternately to describe the people on the move, the people who are trying to cross the land and sea borders of Fortress Europe. Personally, I don't distinguish between migrants or refugees or the different countries they are coming from. Freedom of movement, seeking a better life is a right for everyone, regardless of the reasons. So the area where we operate, the central Mediterranean Sea, the sea between Sicily and Libya, is by far the deadliest sea crossing on the planet. The European migration policy of deterrence has transformed this area into a mass graveyard. Over the past 5 years, more than 15,000 people have lost their lives. And actually, the phrase crossing is misleading. It's not, we're talking about a huge, vast area with hundreds of nautical miles of open sea. Most of the refugee boats start from Libya, and in particular, West Libya. The distance they have to cross up to Sicily is 260 nautical miles. This is around 520 kilometers of open sea without any islands in between, without any lighthouses to guide them. only with one hand compass that they have, and they try to head north. This is practically impossible. With the kind of boats that they travel, in fact, all of these people are sailing to their own death. And their main chance of surviving is to be spotted by a ship, either a fishing ship, a commercial ship, or a rescue ship. During each rescue, the first thing the migrants ask us as soon as they get on board, or as soon as they see us at sea, is where are we gonna go? Where does the ship go? If it goes back to Libya, I prefer to jump. I prefer to die in the sea. I would like to give a trigger warning for what I'm going to say. It is related to violence and loss of life. All the people that we rescue have scars on their body from torture. Everybody has been sold as slave, and almost every woman has been sexually abused by many different men in Libya. Over the past 10 years, Libya is under civil war. There is no functional central government. And in fact, the country is divided into three parts. In the western part, where the majority of the migrants depart from, there are thousands of different armed groups and militias who kidnap all arriving migrants as soon as they enter Libya and put them in improvised prisons where they can stay for months in absolutely horrifying conditions. Each militia, each gang has its own private prison, its own private holding point that can be whatever, a farm, a warehouse, or an abandoned building. Inside these prisons, migrants are tortured every single day. They're tortured and they're forced to call their family and ask for ransom. If they pay the money for the ransom, they are set free, but they still face the risk that another gang might capture them and put them in another prison. Many people have paid 2-3 times to be free, and yet they're captured again by a different gang and put to another prison. So at the end, when there is no more money to pay, this is where the armed groups, they either kill them. We have reports about regular executions in these centers in order to free up space, or they sell them as slaves to a Libyan owner who will use them for any kind of hard labor. So detention centers in Libya are like slave houses. Any Libyan person can go inside these centers and buy a human being, which in most cases is a sub-Saharan African. They also get a paper as a receipt. There was a video from CNN 3 years ago showing one of these slave markets. I guess it's still online. During our last rescue, every person, all the migrants told us that they were sold as slaves 3-4 times each, and all of them were forced to work for months under the threat of guns. People tell us that there's no point escaping because everywhere is the same. In fact, we have testimonies saying that many people prefer to be sold as slaves than stay inside the detention centers, because in slavery there is more food, more space to move, and less torture. A few days ago, actually a few weeks ago, it hit the news that guards in the Al Mabani detention center in Tripoli executed one migrant and injured 2 more by firing shots indiscriminately into the cells where detained people are held. So when I'm focusing on the situation in Libya, because first of all, we need to understand why people are escaping from there, but also when the mainstream media and some political parties are using the argument of the pull factor, that, for example, the NGOs are the pull factor of migration, the rescue ships are the pull factor of migration. This is a standard accusation, but we attract migrants with our presence. This is just fake news and misleading propaganda. There's no such thing as a pull factor. In our case, the only thing that exists is the push factor, the horrifying conditions of Libya, which force people to do anything they can to escape from there. European Union not only does not say a word against these atrocities, but in fact it is funding them and sees them as part of the European plan against immigration. According to the official records, most of the EU funding for the stabilization of Libya goes towards migration containment. The EU has recognized several militias of Tripoli as the legitimate government of Libya, militias that we know they are involved in criminal activities, and is giving them money to build more detention centers. At the same time, the EU is funding and training the so-called Libyan Coast Guard on how to intercept refugee boats and return the people back to Libya, implementing the Malta Declaration Agreement, which was signed in February 2017 by all the European member states, and included hundreds of millions of euros, technical equipment, patrol vessels, and training to the Libyan Coast Guard for its anti-immigration service. A few months ago, the Italian parliament renewed this agreement for a period of 3 more years. So, backed by the EU, Italy will continue to provide assistance to the Libyan Coast Guard, even though that now we have much more evidence than 3 years ago to prove that the situation in Libya is still catastrophic. On the 6th of April, Italy's new Prime Minister, Mario Draghi, chose Libya for his first official trip abroad and praised Tripoli's efforts in stemming refugee crossing towards Europe. So, European states have signed a new agreement in their effort to reduce the number of arrivals by sea, like the agreement they signed with Turkey, but not with a state like Turkey, instead with private entities, with warlords and militias in Libya who kidnap and sell people on the streets. And I believe that this agreement does not get the attention it deserves from the international community and press, compared with the EU-Turkey deal in 2016, even though it's way more devastating regarding the violations of human rights. Many of these illegal refoulements, pushbacks to Libya, are carried out in joint operations with the European assets. The aircrafts of Frontex, the border agency of the European Union, are constantly patrolling. We see them every day flying over our heads, searching for migrant boats. And when they spot them, they don't share their position as they're obliged to do when they find people in distress. Instead, they communicate directly with the Libyan Coast Guard in private channels to return them to Libya. So the EU is actively returning tortured people back to their torturers. They're returning abused women back to their abusers. And this is exactly the reason why the EU is accused of crimes against humanity at the International Criminal Court. In May 2019, human rights lawyers issued a 200-page report to the ICC urging for the prosecution of the EU. The same EU that won the Nobel Prize in 2012, now it is under investigation for committing crimes against humanity. This policy aggravated a situation which has been already horrible. Since 2017, European states have stopped coordinating rescue efforts in the central Mediterranean Sea. There is no more state-led active rescue efforts. They are continuously ignoring distress calls sent from refugee boats. They don't share them with the nearby vessels as they're obliged to do by the maritime law. And they are trying everything they can to hinder rescue activities and restrict the presence of the civil fleet, the civil society search and rescue ships. As far as we are concerned, our ship Mare Ionia has been confiscated 3 times, almost after each rescue. And our captains were always accused of facilitating illegal immigration. But each time, all charges were dropping before going to trial. The problem is that for the period that we are under confiscation, people keep risking their lives at sea, and we cannot be out there to help them. At the moment, there are 3 rescue ships blocked by the Italian government and 1 from the German government. As a result, during the first 5 months of 2021, more than 700 people have been reported dead or missing, and nearly 10,000 have been captured and deported back to Libya. The situation in the Greek islands is by no means better. Same like Italy and Malta, the Italian government is using the COVID pandemic and in a way to pass laws, attack public liberties, and undermine further human rights. In this context, they are trying to set up more prison facilities on the Greek islands to serve as deportation centers. And they have intensified the level of violence against men, women, and children who are trying to cross the Aegean Sea. The most extreme of those human rights violations was, which was actually the reason why big news organizations investigated on the issue, is the fact that the Greek authorities have developed a new technique over the past 15 months. They kidnap migrants who have already reached Greek shores. So people arrive independently on the Greek islands, and the Greek authorities, they, under the threat of guns, of course, they transfer them onto Coast Guard boats. They put them onto inflatable tents, which are called life rafts, and they abandon them in the open sea with the expectation that the waves will push them back to the Turkish waters. Sometimes during night operations, if there is no Turkish Coast Guard in the vicinity, they release them inside Turkish waters. Sometimes they release them in uninhabited islands, and people are found after days by passing fishing boats. Migrants who refuse to enter the rafts often are seriously beaten. So we are not just here, we are not talking only about prevention of entry or interception at sea and pushed back to Turkey, like it has been happening in the central Mediterranean Sea by the Maltese authorities or by the Italian-funded Libyan Coast Guard. Here we are talking about something else. People arriving on the Greek shores and then disappear. Boats arrive, people disappear. On several occasions, migrants who arrive on Greek shores try to hide in rural areas to avoid being captured. Often they call UNHCR to help them, but still in most cases, after a few days, they will be found beaten, tortured, stripped of their personal belongings, floating on rubber rafts in the middle of the Aegean. So we have this unique phenomenon in the world that the Greek Coast Guard, not only they are not rescuing people in distress, as they're obliged to do so, but they're creating them from scratch. In this upside down reality, where in theory a Coast Guard is dedicated to prevent loss of life, here it has become one of the main reasons people are in distress at sea. In 2020, a Norwegian NGO called Aegean Boat Report has registered 324 pushback cases in the Aegean Sea, with approximately 10,000 people being deported without getting the opportunity to seek asylum. 187 life rafts have been picked up in the Aegean Sea, carrying a total of 3,065 people. People on the move are being abducted and disappear in an almost industrial way. Operationally and logistically speaking, we are talking about a huge upgrade, which requires confidentiality and coordination between several different agencies, a great number of coast guards, policemen, military ships, and naval assets. Greece is a bankrupt country, in theory, which lacks super basic stuff in terms of public health, social security, social welfare, and wages. But miraculously, somehow they managed to find resources to wage a literal war against people on the move and spend millions of euros to kidnap, torture, and expel people. On the other side, Greek authorities are stating that those refugee boats are not boats in distress because they are not sinking, so they have every right to push them back and defend our borders. It's the same argument which we hear quite often in the Italian context, that they're trying to accuse the rescue NGOs of being the taxi of illegal immigration, of collaborating with smugglers, on the basis that why did you rescue these people and you brought them to Italy? The boat was not sinking. The truth is that the 99% of migrant boats are boats in distress. 99%. They're boats in danger. Distress is not only when the boat is sinking. They are overcrowded, they are of extremely low quality, nobody's wearing a life jacket, they have no life-saving equipment, they have no navigation or communication equipment, they can collapse at any time. So the only action that the Coast Guards are allowed to do is rescue, nothing else. Abandoning people in distress, or even worse, forcing them to change their course is a crime, and it's an action that can lead to mass casualty events. And all these coast guards should be arrested and put to trial. Like the case of the Libyan camps, the European Union not only does not say a word against the atrocities committed by the Greek side, but in fact, it is funding them also. The EU gave Greece 700 million euros as a reward for its border violence at Evros last year, which was combined by hundreds of illegal pushbacks at sea. The strategy of Europe is shared among member states regarding its external borders. If we can summarize it, it's like make the lives of refugees as horrible as it gets in order to deter them from coming. It's a policy of deterrence. Deterrence in the central Mediterranean Sea is achieved by letting them drown or returning them to the slave markets of Libya. Deterrence in Greece is achieved by confining them in the hell-like camps of the Greek islands. So Moria, Karatepe, or Libya are not accidents. They are parts of a well-designed European policy for asylum seekers. That's why we must never stop revealing these crimes and fighting against them. Thank you from me.
Thank you very much, Iason, for your very enlightening talk. We will pass the word on to Lucy, who is the legal coordinator of the Refugee Legal Support. Lucy, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. So the first thing to say is that what I'm going to speak about is not exhaustive, but I'll try and touch on the key barriers that people face when they arrive in Greece. To define my terms, I'll be using legal terms, which of course are socially constructed and do have a dehumanizing effect. So if I say undocumented, I mean someone that hasn't managed to register their claim for asylum or make any application. If I say asylum seeker, it's someone that's managed to actually claim asylum. And if I say refugee, it means someone who's had a positive decision on their application for asylum. So when people do make it across the sea, as we've just heard how difficult it is to actually manage that. In Greece, people, if they arrive by sea, are confined to one of what's known as the hotspots, which is the 5 Aegean islands of Lesbos, Samos, Chios, Leros, or Kos. And people that arrive by sea are supposed to stay on the islands where it's well known the awful conditions. Of course, as is natural, many people, they do leave to come to Athens, to come to the mainland. But legally speaking, they can't continue their asylum procedure if they do that. The law has got much, much more difficult. So previously, if you were understood as someone that was vulnerable, you should have been transferred to the mainland. But now they only consider people to be transferred if they can't have the care that they need on the island. And even in those cases, people aren't transferred. And in Greece, one of the biggest issues, legally speaking, is that there's no legal aid. There's no state legal aid. So many people navigate these procedures without any assistance from a lawyer. There's only a relatively small number of NGOs with limited capacity, or private lawyers, which of course take money from people. So basically, a lot of people suffer on the islands and can't continue their procedures on the mainland. Something that's maybe not as well known as the conditions on the islands is that when people arrive from Turkey by the land border at Evros, often they struggle to enter the asylum system and claim asylum at all. So they enter Greek territory, but they actually can't claim asylum unless they call Skype. There's a Skype timetable for different languages, different hours, different days, and it's notoriously understaffed. The Greek Asylum Service actually admitted that there was only 2 people answering those Skype lines. So the consequence is that people call at the allotted time for months and months and months with no answer. So they can't actually even claim asylum. So I can just briefly explain when I say vulnerable, which of course is another socially constructed term that's very dehumanizing, but it's a category in Greek law where it's actually decided who fits into this category of vulnerable. So we're talking about people under 18 who are alone, unaccompanied minors, direct relatives of people killed in shipwrecks, people with disabilities, elderly people, pregnant women, single parent families with children under 18, victims of human trafficking, people with serious illnesses, people with mental and psychiatric disabilities, and victims of torture, rape, or other serious forms of psychological, physical, sexual violence. And the thing is that the authorities have the power to actually just take things off this list. So what we saw when the New Democracy government came into power was they took away new mothers were on this list, and people with post-traumatic stress disorder, they just, you know, overnight took them off this list. So if you fit into one of these categories, you're supposed to have evidence that you fit into one of these categories, and that in itself is difficult when you're undocumented, and so you can't access public health care, and there's again limited provision of support from non-government actors. So even claiming asylum in itself on the mainland, people are left without documents, unable to register their claim for asylum, and liable to detention, even though they've taken every step they possibly can. And absent from this list also is families. So single parent families is on the list, but not people with children. So the reason I took the time to list the categories of vulnerable people is because this also determines in Greece what limited support you can access. So there's no government accommodation for people as standard, but there are EU-funded programs, like the cash card system is designed to give people basic living allowance that they're supposed to pay rent from. It's 150 euros a month for an adult, and it's EU money. Again, there's long delays. You apply not through Skype, but through Viber, and you can wait many, many months to actually have your request processed. So you're left with absolutely no support. And you can't get the cash card until you've actually registered yourself with the authorities, which people try in vain to do for months on end. There's also a EU accommodation program called SDA, which you're only eligible to be referred for if you fall into one of these categories of vulnerability. And again, you might never, sorry, there's a cat here. You might never receive an answer, or you might wait months on end in urgent need of accommodation and not receive a response. So for people that have managed to claim asylum, the issue is also that the appointments provided by the Greek Asylum Service can be very far in advance. So for example, I'm working with people who have family reunification cases. They want to register their claim for asylum so they can apply to go and join their family members elsewhere. And these kinds of people's claims are supposed to be prioritized. But in some cases, people are offered an appointment to come and claim asylum next year. So there's literally delays of months, sometimes years. And then again, you wait years, sometimes multiple years, to have your interview. And only after your interview will you be issued with a decision. So the process here takes years. And as I mentioned before, there's not support while you're waiting in Greece for those years. So it's worth, at this stage, before outlining the entitlements for people once they're recognised, explaining maybe a bit about the context. In Greece, the Greek Asylum Service, the government department responsible for processing asylum claims, has only actually existed since 2013. The first asylum claim was recorded by the Greek Asylum Service in June 2013. Before that, people who needed protection had to approach the police and were often abused and imprisoned. So Of course, all eyes have been on Greece since 2015, where there was a huge increase in arrivals, but people have been arriving to Greece in need of protection or having left their country for many, many years before then. And it's worth outlining that this is a European system, it's European policies that contain people in these conditions in Greece. So even though the arrivals since 2015 have decreased, the number of asylum applications in Greece have increased dramatically. So from 2015 to 2018, even though we stopped seeing images in the media of mass arrivals and people considered that the so-called refugee crisis was over, in Greece, asylum claims went up 400% because people were literally stuck here. The Balkan route closed in 2016, and people, despite having such a dreadful lack of support, are basically trapped here, and it's European policies that keep people trapped here. So the little support that there is for people when they claim asylum is generally EU funded, but this is quite a cynical attempt to make the conditions good enough that people can be returned, if they manage to leave Greece, back to Greece. So in 2011, there was a landmark ruling in the courts that said that Greece was, the conditions here were so dreadful that anyone who had their fingerprints here but who continued their journey couldn't be sent back to Greece. Following that judgment, obviously there was an interest from especially the richer North European countries to throw some money at Greece to, for example, for camps, for the cash card program, for the Estia program, so that on paper then, in 2006, sorry, let me just get this right. In 2016, December 2016, the European Commission said, oh, you know, there's the asylum service now, there's all of these different programs, conditions have improved to the point where we can keep people in Greece, we can even send people back to Greece if they continue their journeys. So, I mean, still, legally speaking, things are getting more and more difficult. If someone receives a positive decision here in Greece, then their cash support is stopped. And if they are in a camp or Estia accommodation, the UNHCR accommodation program, they have to leave within 30 days. The point is that there's no effective support for this transition. So there's something called the Helios program, which again is EU funded and implemented by IOM, the International Organization for Migration, which run voluntary return programs all over the world and are very heavily involved in Greece. And this Helios program is designed to support people for 6 months following a grant of asylum, so when people get their refugee status. But in order to obtain support, you have to first sign a house contract. And you can't sign a house contract if you've got no money for a deposit. You can't sign a house contract if, as Wael is going to speak about, you don't speak the language. You also need to have a Greek bank account in order for Helios to pay the support to you. To open a Greek bank account is really much harder than you could imagine, and you need things like a Greek tax number. So these bureaucratic barriers stop people from accessing the support that's on paper. And on paper, this support is used to say that Greece is okay now. After Helios, because it's only supposed to be 6 months, people face barriers to access the limited Greek state support that there is. Of course, it's a difficult situation for everyone in Greece, and there's limited state support for everyone, but there are strict residence requirements, for example, to have help with your rent, and people who have just been granted refugee status don't qualify simply for that government support. So I think that that's all I'll say for now. I don't know how long I was speaking, but yeah, we can speak more at the end if there's any questions or more information people would like.
Thanks so much, Lucy. That was great. And yeah, it's really important to understand that even if people make it across the sea and into the EU, there are so many obstacles to claiming asylum and going through the process, let alone starting to build a life in Greece. So finally, we'll now hear from Wael, who'll be discussing his experience of language learning and the importance of language as a tool. So Wael, I will hand it over to you now.
Thank you very much for arranging for such a session today. Thanks for our speakers, Sans Harry and Krisa, for facilitating this meeting. Again, my name is Wael Habbal. I am an Arabic interpreter with KAST. I am also a member of the Solidarity Fields Farmer Association. I am a European Leaders with Obama Foundation and the co-founder and director of the Syrian and the Greek Youth Forum. Today, I am here to talk about the importance of language in our journey of getting into new place and journey of empowering ourselves. I want to showcase of language as a key of finding sustainability and finding a connection within the new place that we move in. Firstly, I arrived to Greece in 2015 and I decided to seek asylum in a country where everyone was trying to find a way out of it. I took this decision when I realized that I am already in an EU country, in Greece, a country that shares a lot of similar traditions, weathers, and behaviors from the society I came from. In 2015, I moved to Chios Island, and while I was walking in the small center of Chios, I noticed a small park with a few tents around. I approached this park and found the team of LARTA, a group of lawyers volunteering to turn the park into a resting station for new arrivals between their transportation from one place to another. I kept on visiting this park for a few days, and eventually I started working with the team of LARTA, using my basic English that I literally knew few words to communicate with people, even though I felt very, very shy to talk to anyone at the beginning because I was afraid to sound maybe funny or wrong, or making sounds that maybe doesn't make any sense to anyone. However, I kept myself busy, and with that time, I managed to start communicating with my colleagues easier. I had my routine of packing and unpacking boxes and fixing tents, where I would exchange talk with people, which helped me develop my language skills in English at the beginning. And that was the first key, because this team accepted me as I am with my basic English, and they were correcting me. And this is one of the most important tools to help others to learn a new language, which is to give them the space to make mistakes and to correct them. After that, I moved to Lesbos, and here I'm gonna show my case of learning the language through my work and through what I did, because that was the school for me through all these years. Moved to Lesbos Island and started volunteering with Bikba camp. And for the first 6 months, I was mostly in the kitchen, the garden, and doing some translation with the nurse. It was not enough for me, and I felt I want to do more. I was watching the team that goes to distribute the food and to assist people in Moria camp. I was feeling very guilty why I cannot go with them, and the question and the answer was always because you cannot communicate at the moment. In here, I had a big motive to teach myself. There were not enough resources back then in Lesbos for me to work. I didn't have enough functional space in my head also to attend a school. So I had to teach myself by listening to everyone around me, to watch movies, to read any English word that passes by me, until I leveled my English skills. And I went to my first night at Moria camp with Konstantin from USA, with Natasha from UK, and with Kira from Greece. It was an international group, which also helped me to listen more to more languages. At the night, I understood how language is definitely a key for me to be helped and also to help others, to know more, to do more, and to learn more. And as we know, all of us, the year of 2015 and 2016 in Lesbos, it was hectic, as it was the time where only Syrians were eligible to enter the camps, under the excuse that they are the only country under the war at that moment. it was hard for me to reach a common ground of communication with people that were coming from different backgrounds. I felt they were putting the blame on the Syrians, on me, of not having the same resources and rights, and I don't blame them. At that time, I was volunteering outside of Moria camp, interacting with people from different nationalities. And language in that time, it was a great tool for me. Even though I managed to learn very few words from each language, I managed to explain to the other people that this is a systematic mistake. It's not our fault. And we wish the same for everyone. At that time, I understood how language is important also to bond people and to break stereotypes, to get people together and to build friendships. And honestly, after many months of feeling lost in Athens at the beginning of the first 5 months for me in here as a new arrivals who knows no one, who doesn't speak the language, after all this period, when I started to volunteer at that place, when I start to use the language, I felt I start to be a useful person. When I stood up and I translated for the first family, I wanted to learn more in order to do more in that time. And then in late 2016, again, language was very important in my life because it helped me to get a new job. I started working as an official translator, interacting with many people at the same time, facilitating their need, and it was a paid job. And that's why I also recognize the importance of the language because it brought the sustainability to my life. And in here, I decided to work more on my skills. I moved to Athens, and I was accepted by the American University in Athens in order for me to start studying English. For the first few months, it worked well, but after a few months, I couldn't continue my study because I had to work because of the very few resources. As from the beginning, I didn't receive any cash aid. Back then in 2015, there were no any system to support new arrivals. So again, I had to stop my university and my study. And this case, many people are facing today until now in 2021, when they have to give up their study, when they have to quit their study in order to be able to go to work and to make their income. After that, I decided to go back to the humanitarian field. I joined many NGOs and associations to facilitate new arrivals and people who have been in the city for a long time. And due to my constant involvement in the field, I witnessed and experienced many complexes, issues, and misunderstanding because of the language barrier, because of the lack of interpretation. And as not everyone has the mental capacity to learn a new language while looking for a place to live or while searching for a job opportunity to cover their basic needs. Many people are in constant struggles with communication in the city of Athens, starting from the asylum service, where many people were sent away from the door of the asylum service because of the excuse that there is no interpretation available with their own language. In other cases, people lost their rights to use the benefit of the health service, where in many cases also people were not able to explain their needs, while also the doctor would be disappointed by not being able to do their work. So the barrier in here is not only affecting displaced people, but also affecting locals, professionals who are willing to help, to offer the help, but they don't find a way to link to the cases, to the people, and to understand their story. In here, if I am a doctor, of course, I will be disappointed if I couldn't do my job. And as a patient, of course, I will be the most disappointed and sad and felt left alone if I cannot go to my doctor appointment, for example. In general, as we said, the lack of language and communication create a lack of social interaction in the city. It creates frustration for both in the city. And also, as we know, when I learn the language, I will learn about 70% new things about the culture of the city I live in. Since the beginning of my journey in Greece until today, every Greek words I learned it, of every phrase or every new sentence, it explains something for me about the Greek cultures, I believe when people start to learn more about the language, they will find more keys inside the cultures, and they can actually link to it, to their own culture, to find a similarity in it. Here, I will be now explaining more about an initiative that I started in 2018, which called the Syrian and Greek Youth Forum. We are a group of international activists, artists, and academics working together to find and implement sustainable solution for an inclusive society, to break stereotypes and to connect people. We established ourselves as a key resource for Syrians in Athens and elsewhere in Greece in 2018, and are working in solidarity and collaboration with other minority organizations, communities, to become active citizens in the society. Through our culture and employment and environmental departments, we support community building activity, provide pathways to employment, and contribute and participate in social and political researches. And now I'm gonna spotlight about a very important step that we took as a group in the city, and it has to do with the use of the terminology refugees. At the beginning, I recognize and acknowledge that the term of refugees is a political term. It must be there because it explains our political status. But after being in Greece for the last 6 years, after living in here, working in here, loving in here, struggling in here, and as I start contributing to the society around me, as I start taking part in different initiatives, working for positive changes, as I try to activate myself, to activate the community around me, and to activate the city, I start to advocate with the community for the term active citizens. So what we did is we started a campaign, which is a series of events. We started appearing in many different social and political events in the city and in the countrysides as active citizens. We asked everyone to be calling us active citizens of today. We are not ashamed of the word of refugees. We don't feel minimized by it. We recognize it as a political term. But as we are included in the society, we want to be called according to our social activism. And that's why we said we want to be called as active citizens. We got a very positive response from the municipality of Athens, from the city of Athens, in terms of the term we are bringing. And we were accepted in their program in the municipality of Athens as an Athenian group who are working for positive change in the city. In here, I would like to share a few words also about our active citizenships. Also, our active citizen project will be starting a media lab soon in order to do storytellings and in order to do documentaries, starting from our reality to share it with everyone. Thank you everyone for listening, for giving me the opportunity to talk today and to be in here.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Well, that was also incredibly great to hear. And just a reminder now at the end of the panel discussion that there is a link to donate to the salaries of our interpreters in the chat and on the Facebook Live. Please do donate. It really is the only way we can continue providing advice is through hiring and working alongside interpreters. We're now going to ask a few questions to the panel that have been asked to us on Facebook and on Zoom. Grace, do you want to go?
Yeah, we will get a question from Emma first, which is part of our organization, and she works with the media Are You Serious? Let us get Emma.
Emma, are you there? We're trying to unmute you, but we can't see your Zoom name, sorry.
Okay, we can move on to the next question and get Emma's question next. So the first question for Iasonas. Iason, are you here with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. So the first question for you is, how does the EU justifies the pushbacks to itself? And then the next question is there any kind of evidence of the new tactic that Greece is using of abducting refugees and release them back to the open sea?
Okay, for the first question, for the Aegean Sea, I don't think they can justify it. They are just denying it, that they pretend it's not happening. For the case of the Libyan, the central Mediterranean Sea, they are justifying it in the way that the Libyan authorities are, the Libyan Coast Guard is the competent authority of that part of the sea. So they are entitled to, they have given them the full power to assume coordination of the rescues. So the root of the problem is the fabrication, the fiction of a Libyan search and rescue zone, which is equivalent to recognize Libya as a safe place for the disembarkation of survivors. This is convenient for the EU because it allows Italy and Malta to relinquish their duties to rescue and receive migrants who may be in danger at sea. Just to clarify, a search and rescue zone has nothing to do with the concept of territorial waters. Search and rescue zone is a part of international waters and can extend much further, up to hundreds of miles. And here it's a huge contradiction that how can they recognize a Libya search and rescue zone if there is no safe place in Libya? Libya is under civil war. Libya is not considered a safe place, not even by the EU itself. And yeah, this is a huge paradox. How can they recognize Libya's zone since there is no safe place? The answer is simple. They violate international law to contain migration towards Europe, get the rescue NGOs out of the way, and replace them with the EU-funded Libyan Coast Guard. For the next question, how do we know? There are so many reports, investigations, videos, testimonies from survivors providing evidence of the crimes committed by the Greek side, the Greek operations of mass migrant pushbacks. It's everywhere. Everybody knows it. Mare Liberum, a search and rescue NGO based on Lesbos, documented 321 migrant pushbacks in the Aegean last year. Aegean Boat Report, another NGO, the same. There is the Legal Center Lesbos on the island of Lesbos, composed by human rights lawyers who they released a report, an investigation. They used testimonies from people who were deported to Turkey, and they constructed the cases of, I think it was several different illegal pushbacks. Of course, sometimes it's different because the people are stripped of their clothes and their belongings. Greek authorities are very cautious on removing the cell phones and any means of communications from them. So it's very difficult for the people to report it, actually. But we have articles on local newspapers in Chios, in Lesbos, showing newly arrived migrants walking through the fields, and the next day the same people are found floating in the middle of the Aegean. We can identify them from pictures of the Turkish Coast Guard. Of course, the Greek state says that they never found anyone. This never happened. In some cases, it is so absurd that in some cases, the UNHCR itself receives direct calls from people on the ground, from people on Greek shores, that are begging them for help. UNHCR calls the Greek authorities to go on the spot, and when the Greek authorities go, they say, sorry, we didn't find anyone. They kidnap the people, they put them in who knows where, and the next day they throw them at sea. There is a huge pressure by the government not to speak about these things. They're trying everything they can to silence voices who speak out. We had the recent police operation on Lesbos in October 2020 against 4 NGOs who have been reporting the Greek side's pushback activities. In the Greek media, there is total blackout. Only a few left-wing websites talk about it, and in general, it's not widespread. It's not so known in the Greek audience because of this.
Thank you for that. Our next question is for Lucy from the Facebook. And the question is, Lucy, could you say something about the adequacy or the inadequacy of the Refugee Convention in our time?
It's a very difficult question. I mean, it's obviously far too limited because there's a million reasons, infinite human experiences, and the Refugee Convention gives just 5 reasons that you must fear persecution. So it's race, religion, nationality, political opinion, and particular social group. But of course, there are many more things that compel people to leave their countries that don't fit neatly within one of those boxes. So the job of a lawyer, like I feel my job, is to fit a person's experience into one of these boxes. And often some of the most traumatic things that have happened to people aren't relevant for the purposes of their asylum interview or for the purposes of their asylum claim. So my personal opinion is that it's much too restrictive. And I mean, it was drafted, the Refugee Convention is from 1951 and was drafted at a time after the Second World War. And obviously a lot's happened in the world since then. Even things like climate change, it's always going to be a really controversial thing to raise, and it divides people even within the legal community. But it's a perfectly natural thing to leave your country for a better life or for economic reasons. It's something that I'm sure any European person would do if they needed, or I mean, even in Greece, at a time of recession, it's totally normal that people would leave to seek work in other countries. So if it's normal for people from Europe to do that, why should it be any different for other people in the world? I mean, it's my personal opinion, but yeah, the law is far too restrictive. It's not usually, it's not really a pleasure to work within the law.
We know. Thank you very much, Lucy. And the next question is for Wael. So Wael, what are the biggest barriers to people learning languages in Greece, and can people access education?
Well, one of the first barrier, it's a start, I believe, I'm gonna talk about from people themselves. It's about taking the decision to stay in Greece or not, because if someone does not want to stay in Greece, of course, they will not want to learn the language. And this goes back to the policy of migration, of not issuing paper for people for many years. So this is one of the barriers, and it has with the personal effort. But if we talk about more barriers, it's the migration policy, it's the lack of integration, national integration plans, where in my belief, it's supposed from the beginning, when people enter the country, they should be offered education. I haven't seen any school yet in Greece that it says this is a school for Greek language for new arrivals. There is always an effort by groups, NGOs, or some national programs, but it's not enough, because the need in Greece for teaching the language is very large. This is one of the lack. Other lacks is, I believe, the state are not searching enough into people cases to understand what fits their mindset of studying the language, because we have people could learn in school, other people could learn as an informal education. There are few standards to learn the language in Greece. Most of it needs commitment. And at the moment, yes, of course, in order to learn the language, you need to be committed to it, you need to give time. But the question on many people's head is, if I am about to give 4 or 5 hours of my day to learn the language, how I am going to bring food to my family, how I am going to work and afford living in Greece, since we understood that there are many people has been evacuated from their shelters and has been stopped their cash allowance. Another barrier, in my opinion, is not finding teachers who have the same mother language of the people who are willing to learn the language. It's becoming more difficult to translate from Greek to English to Arabic, from Greek to English to Farsi, from Greek to English to French. And I was surprised of having this lack in Greece, since we have many people who came to Greece 30 years ago or 40 years ago who managed to be part of the society and who they could be hired by the state in order to run such educational programs. So those are the barriers I noticed. And there are few, I believe there are more.
Thank you very much, Wael. The next question is also for Iason. It comes from the Zoom partly. So what can NGOs and activists do throughout Europe to support the action in the Mediterranean Sea? And in your opinion, this is quite a hard question, is it more valuable to volunteer or to donate to charities and organizations?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that in our context, one of the top priorities is to give visibility to the horrifying conditions in the central Mediterranean Sea and in Libya, because we operate in a context where we are alone in the middle of the sea, where there is no eyes, no witnesses, no media coverage, and all the first-hand information has to come out by us, by ourselves. So I believe that all this lack of information, the lack of coverage, the unawareness is the ground where the far right-wing rhetoric is blooming. It's one of the reasons they can say whatever they want and shape the public discourse without facing strong reaction. For example, in Italy, Salvini was able to convince the public for all the nonsense he said regarding the ships, we are smugglers, because the reality of the sea is far. So I think it's of crucial importance to raise awareness, to advocate in our own social circles, to speak out against these crimes. And in terms of contribution, there are a million ways we can offer ourselves. It's not that we have to go, everybody has to go at sea. To be honest, I think that the battle on land is more important in the sense that it is our everyday struggles that can finally uproot xenophobia and racism from our lives. And at the end of the day, it's the battles on land that will define the future of operations at sea.
Thank you very much, Iason. The next question is for Lucy, but of course, Wael and Iason can touch on this after Lucy. And it's from Facebook. So how can we explain the lack of appropriate migration policy in Greece? Is it mostly because of xenophobia? So Lucy, you can go first, and then Iason and Wael can follow.
I'm really sorry. Could you clarify what you mean? I don't understand exactly. Sorry.
So the question is about the lack of appropriate migration policies. It's from Facebook, and I imagine it's in regard to the lack of, housing or healthcare or like adequate facilities for people who arrive in Greece. And then the follow-up question is, do you think it's because of xenophobia? And again, we can open this to the floor if you'd rather. We do have a lot of questions, so.
Yeah, I think xenophobia and othering and racism plays a huge part. And also the reality is that when people arrive in Europe, they're contained in the countries that have the most struggling economies, like Italy, like Greece. So it creates further divisions and further racism and xenophobia when you have a situation whereby people should have access to basic support while while they go through this system, but it's very difficult or very complicated very sensitive to demand certain things that citizens don't get. So, like, for example, in the UK, even though it could be argued the situation is materially better for people claiming asylum, for me it makes me more angry because it's a political choice to give people the same amount that people get on a cash card in Greece. It's a political choice to provide accommodation on a no-choice basis and to exclude certain people from support once they're granted status. Like, in the context of the UK, it's a question of politics as opposed to economic imperatives. Like, in Greece, it's arguably more complicated because a lot of people don't have state support in general. But that's why I think, for example, when there are mass transfers of people from the islands, local people sometimes resist the transfer of those people. It creates. I mean, it's really complicated, and because I'm not Greek, and it's difficult. It's a difficult thing to speak about, and I'm not sure if I'm actually addressing the question, to be honest. So sorry. Maybe Wael and Jason understand it better and have more insight.
Yeah, it would be great to get Wael's perspective and to get Iason's perspective as well. So, Wael, would you like to share with us what you think about this question?
From my understanding, from the beginning, Greece was not ready to receive a large amount of arrivals at once. The same case goes to the arrivals. They were not ready to stay in Greece. So there were no any sign of starting an integration policy in Greece because of those two facts. But I believe after, and we can remember together, like the first asylum service opened in 2014 after a big demonstration of people who demonstrated to ask for the right of seeking asylum in Greece. And there where they start to recognize refugees in 2014 after these incidents. But I believe the Migration Ministry and the Asylum Service, following the lead of the European Union, they felt comfortable with this situation, and they realized how the lack of national integration policy, it will push people back. It will intervene in people from moving and continue outside of Greece. And it will give a very hard pictures about the asylum in Greece for anyone who would think to pass by Greece. I heard 2 years ago they started national integration plans, and it was with housing and with education and social services. It worked for very few people, but it needs a lot of improvement on it for sure. So that was from my side, but I would like to add something to the last question, which it has to do with the barrier of languages. I forgot a very important point, which has to do with the fact that people are still living in the camps. This is one of the biggest barriers. I don't know how we are expecting people to hear the language, to understand the culture and the language while living 2 hours away from the locals, from the city, from any social interaction. Thank you.
Thanks for clarifying that, Wael. Iason, would you like to comment on the lack of kind of appropriate migration policy in Greece? Perhaps interesting as also, a Greek perspective. Oh, you're on mute.
But okay. I was trying to unmute, but you were doing it at the same time. Okay.
Everything you know.
Yeah, there are several different reasons for this. I think the main one is that the Greek migration policy is designed not on the basis of inclusion and protection of human rights, but on the contrary. It is designed on the basis of creating conditions of deterrence, exclusion, and exploitation. It's a system that is designed to transform migrants, refugees, asylum seekers into invisible, unprotected vulnerable and low-cost workers for the country's economy. The Greek miracle of the 90s, because Greece up to 2009 had a relatively high GDP. It was one of the wealthiest countries in Europe. The construction sector, the agriculture sector, the care sector were based on underpaid, undocumented foreign workers, almost at the level of 100%. So there was never this idea of including the people. It was just the idea of making them low-cost workers without rights and papers. Of course, if you are a foreign millionaire, you can get a golden visa or even a European passport, and this is a totally different story. So we have always to, that's why I'm focusing on the workers, because the class factor is for sure something that matters. Because if you invest in Greece, actually, if you land at the Greek airport, you can see even the adverts saying that if you invest in Greece, if you pay something like 200,000 euro to buy a house or something, you get immediately a golden visa. So you can walk freely, you have rights to travel, to stay legal, you have papers. And for the rest of the people, they have to go through all these hell-like conditions. And yes, I think that's why this also brings up the fact that we should ourselves who were involved in the humanitarian or in the activist sector, let's say, we should never fall into the trap of distinguishing between legal and illegal people, because when we are talking about illegal or migrants or whatever, we are implying that regular travel is an option, and it's not. Most of the countries, even today, admit people from developed countries. And as long as migration policies discriminate against the poor, we can only expect to see more of this.
Yeah, absolutely, Iason. Thank you.
The next question is for Wael. So Wael, what is your experience of working as an interpreter at KAST?
It's a very good question. Actually, I really appreciate this opportunity for many reasons. One first reason of it, because as working with KAST, as working with the team, as interacting with all people from different needs and different backgrounds, as I mentioned before, I got the opportunity to get informed in all the legal processes and the social services in the city, which allowed me also to transfer it to people even outside of my work in KAST. So it reaches out my knowledge in this regard, and this support my work in general. Secondly, as working with KAST, because I'm not doing a full-time job, working as a like a part-time job in KAST, it allows me, first of all, to keep in working and to keep bringing income to myself, but at the same time to have the space to focus on everything else that I am doing. And this was a big fight for me to achieve it, because always I had the option either to have a full-time job, either to focus on the alternative, which is I prefer. And in the case of working together in here, I managed to bring both of it together.
Thanks, Wael.
It's not always easy. Also, I have to explain that it's not always.
Be honest.
Not always to work in this field, especially in the case of KAST, because they focus on three main categories, which is most needed: the legal support, the health support, and the social support. Every day you hear, or every Friday I hear really heavy stories. You hear the constant need again and again and again when people are calling us from the street with their families, stating that they are homeless. You feel in sometimes that your hands are really tight, but nevertheless, like, we keep doing our best, we keep listening to those people at least, and that's what I mostly appreciate about working with the team, that we could offer this space to be bold, to be heard at least. We are honest with them. We tell them, like, we explain the process. We tell them maybe we cannot change anything, but we are here to listen to you. And this is what mostly people are looking for. because sometimes while they are telling you their issues, they found the solution themselves.
Thank you for speaking about that, Wael. A question for Lucy now. So you discussed briefly, the delays that people are facing with registration and pre-registration. And I mean, delay can sometimes seem like quite a kind of harmless word, but what do you think are the impact of the delays on people trying to register for asylum here in Greece?
The delays are devastating because people can't get on with their lives. They don't know whether that they will stay in Greece, whether, for example, like when Wael is talking about active citizenship and language learning, or when we're speaking about education and access to schools. A lot of the time you meet people that they really can't bear the reality that they will live in these conditions with such a lack of support. So it's like they have to have hope that they will leave. So it's very difficult to find the energy to learn a language or to take these steps when you don't know where your future will lie, and when you're just waiting and waiting with no support and no way to support yourself. Also, like, independence is what everyone usually wants. And I mean, for example, like an example of the punitive policies that the New Democracy government brought in, it's before, once you've claimed asylum, it's legal to work. But the New Democracy government made it illegal to work for the first 6 months after claiming asylum. The reality is that people can't find work, but still this change in law existed to kind of dehumanize people further, to stop them being independent, another barrier towards independence. So it's not just about delays, it's about people not being able to live their lives, not being able to, interviews are routinely cancelled and postponed as well, due to lack of interpretation, as Wael mentioned, or because of strikes, for example, by staff, which I don't complain about, workers striking. But I mean, the reality is that people wait years for an interview that could be cancelled for one of many reasons. And so the delays also, I wanted to mention, I didn't mention when I spoke, is like, so for example, the Syrian fast track procedure for people with a Syrian passport, it's much faster, the asylum process. Like, you get your decision the same day or the next day. But people then wait around sometimes up to 2 years to get their ID and their travel document. So actually, the European policies and the Greek laws are designed to make people's life very difficult and to contain people in Greece. But if people can't move freely, then they wait to go through the asylum procedure. If they get a positive decision, then they, a lot of the time, want just their documents so they can leave Greece legally and claim asylum again. But people wait years to get those documents. And there's huge delays. People are waiting, checking the Ministry of Migration's website every day to see if their residence permit's ready. Not just the people that have just been granted asylum, but people that have been living in Greece for years with refugee status, whose ID's expired and they need to renew it. And they're in a position where they're undocumented. I mean, the ministry announces that all the cards are automatically extended, but you can't leave Greece and tell the authorities of another country it's still valid. So I mean, the delays aren't just in claiming asylum and waiting for your interview. They're throughout the whole procedure, and it causes a huge amount of suffering. And yeah, it's a huge problem.
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah, I think we wouldn't be excessive if we called long waiting times mental torture, and because in many cases this is what it is. Our next question is for Iason. We will get a few more questions before closing. So Iason asked the question from Facebook is, so new technologies that will be used for border control, namely the sound cannons and drones, how will these devices have an impact on migration? And maybe Lucy and Wael can reflect on the use of technology as well after Iasonas goes.
Yeah, it has been happening already. So there are drones in the central Mediterranean, at the Evros border, there are airplanes, aerial assets, naval assets flying. There is like their full arsenal deployed against migrants and refugees. And on this, I would like to say that I think that a key element to connect effectively with refugees today is not to see them as permanent victims in need of charity and or protection, but as agents of their own destiny. We are talking about people who, with remarkable energy, cross war zones, minefields, and challenge powerful armies and police bodies all over the world. Even though at first it may be hard for us to accept, I think that the ruling authorities recognize this as an insurgency, let's say. That's why they have deployed their full arsenal of counterinsurgency measures against it. It's not an exaggeration to say that migrants and refugees are trying to survive by crossing borders, perhaps in a period of the most brutal repression of human mobility. And that's why, regardless of the labels, whether they are refugees, economic migrants, or asylum seekers, these people assert and defend the right to life, the right to freedom, and the right to movement as fundamental universal human rights. So by crossing borders, migrants objectively enact freedom. And it's amazing to observe how intensely the word freedom is chanted in so many different languages at migrant rallies and demonstrations throughout the world. As far as we are concerned, we have seen with our own eyes the daily resistance and the tremendous determination of men, women, and children to escape from the Libyan detention camps, and after escaping, to refuse to return to them. We had cases where rescued migrants forced captains of passing vessels to take them to a safe port in Malta or in Italy, and not in Libya. They were accused of piracy, and the most crazy thing is that they were acquitted by an Italian court, saying that they were defending their right to life.
Thanks for that response, Iasonas. If either Lucy or Wael wants to comment on the use of new technologies in the migration system, please do. But we also have one final question that we'd like to put to all the panelists. Okay, so the final question that we have for all of you, it's also from the Facebook. To what extent can organizations offer support, but where does the responsibility of the state begin and end? So I think it's also a question about, how does the responsibility of organizations to kind of alleviate the burden of the state, what are the issues that creates? In Greece, for example, the work we do at Khora is we're providing a service that arguably should be passed by the state. So any responses to state responsibility versus organizational responsibility would be great. Maybe we'll start with Wael, if you're happy to start.
I understand from the beginning, when I arrived to Greece in 2016, 2017, I start to see a lot of NGOs start working in the field. And I didn't see many local NGOs that work in. The local groups that I interacted with, they were mostly volunteering groups. And from my understanding, maybe the state was not ready to interact, and maybe the state needed the assistance of all these groups and NGOs in order to facilitate any interactions with the new arrivals. But after 5 or 6 years, I don't understand why the state is not handling and not taking a responsibility of their own duties towards the new arrivals, all the people who are living in Greece at the moment. Of course, there is a big lack created in here because we need the locals, we need their interactions. I believe people are tired a bit of having always to be in the loop of a third party in there. Of course, our work is still valuable and is needed because everyone comes, added their perspective and added their way of working. But we need to see more initiative going from the state towards these issues. This is from my side.
Thank you. I'm going to hand this over next to Lucy for your reflections on the same question.
It's a really deep question, and I don't think it's very useful to speak about my views about states in general, but I'll just say, like, it's very dangerous when there's state failures or deliberate attempts by states to neglect or harm people, and non-governmental actors, be they political activists or non-governmental organizations, fill that gap or address that need or repair that harm without doing it critically. So of course, it's something that there could be a whole other panel discussion specifically about, like, the complexities and the political question of like cleaning up after the state, or should the state do more, but at the end of the day, I personally think if there's a need, like if people are hungry and you can do something to feed people, if there's a complicated legal process and no support and you can offer legal support, okay, do it, but you must do it critically. You must speak about the reality. You must advocate as much as possible and publicize as much as possible the reality that you're seeing and that you're focusing your energy to address. Because if you do it silently, or if you do it uncritically, or if you're complicit with, I don't know how much I should talk personally, but so I'll stop there. But I believe you must do it critically, yeah, and publicize the reality of the state's failures. Otherwise, it's very dangerous, and you. Like, essentially, maybe nothing will change if you don't speak out about the reality and speak critically.
Yeah, we agree very strongly with what you are saying. So finally, Iason, your response on the same question in terms of state responsibility and NGO or organizational need.
I don't think we can wait much from European states. I think that the hope lies with the European societies. We have to fight for the immediate cancellation of the EU-Turkey deal and the EU-Libya deal. We have to fight for the immediate evacuation of the horrifying camps in the Greek islands and in Libya. And the contradiction is that there are so many people in Europe, there are so many initiatives. Only in Germany, there are around 100 cities and municipalities willing to receive refugees right now, an expression of genuine European solidarity. But all these efforts are blocked only by the European governments, by the German government in particular. It's the same what's happening in Italy. The state is refusing to rescue migrants in distress at sea. There is initiatives, the civil fleet, it's called, the rescue NGOs, who are trying to fill this void, and they're getting blocked by the Italian government. We have 4 ships blocked by the Italian government. So the state is not fulfilling their responsibility towards international law. Citizens are stepping in, civil society is stepping in, and they're getting criminalized. So it's obvious that there is no other way other than organizing between ourselves and fight against these policies. And I believe that in these days, in these times where the war against migration is an ongoing reality, where solidarity is being criminalized, where rescue is being criminalized, where the right to life is being criminalized, any action of resistance against these policies is crucial to continue. Because someone asked before, what should we do? I think whatever we can do, it's beneficial. Whether you give a portion of food, or you block a deportation, or you advocate and provide legal support, or you share the news and raise awareness, there are a million ways to help and to contribute. And finally, we need to stop distinguishing between migrants and refugees. We have to fight for the freedom of movement. Freedom of movement is a universal human right. The history of Europe is a history of continuous migration. The history of humanity is a history of continuous migration. And historically speaking, the greatest threat for our communities has always been fascism and racism, not migrants.
That's about all we have time for today. So first of all, thank you to all of our speakers for taking the time to be here tonight and providing such an interesting and necessary perspective on the barriers faced by people in Greece. And just as a reminder, you can donate to our crowdfunding campaign to help fund our interpreters, and there's a link in the chat and on the Facebook group.
Yeah, thank you so much for watching today. This event is very important to us as Khora Asylum support team, because especially what Lucy and Wael mentioned, these are things that we experience every single day. And today it was an opportunity to share with you all these things and advocate for change. As Iason has said, by crossing borders, people enact freedom, and nobody is free until we are all free. So let's get back to the very basics.
Thanks again, everyone, for joining, and we'll hopefully see you soon. Bye.
Bye.